CRAG, as you well know, is the Campaign for Recognition of the Armenian Genocide. It is a part of a wider community-based organization in the UK, and its primary function is to lobby for the recognition of the Armenian genocide. My involvement with it some moons ago had to do largely with the political aspects of recognition and trying to lobby the British government and members of parliament to think a bit more seriously about the significance of the Armenian genocide to Armenians who are members of this country, citizens of this country, and in order to see whether there is any possibility of securing recognition within the UK, like some other countries have done, whilst others within Europe have not yet done so.
Can you tell me a little bit about the accomplishments you've made with CRAG?
Well, in my opinion, it's very difficult to talk of CRAG in terms of accomplishments. At least I do not do that because as a political lobbyist, the first thing you learn is that it's an unending journey. You cannot say, I'm going to do one thing and that's it, I've accomplished my task. And particularly within the Armenian genocide and its recognition, which is fraught with so many political issues attached to it, it becomes very difficult to sort of say what accomplishments or not have been achieved over the years. However, I would suspect that in a very modest sense, there has been some headway made in this country, part of it because of the efforts deployed by CRAG, part of it because of other organizations and other individuals who've also spoken out. For me, personally, during my time of involvement with CRAG some years ago, I think the jewel of the crown would be the recognition by the Edinburgh City Council on 2 successive years of the Armenian genocide. That recognition to me was very important for a variety of reasons. One, there aren't that many Armenians in Scotland, so it wasn't a question of votes and numbers and bodies that counted. It was more an ethical issue that was put in front of the councillors in Edinburgh who thought about it. We discussed it. It went to the floor of the council and it was voted on quite with a substantial majority. Then it was challenged by pro-Turkish lobby organizations, and therefore we had to go back to the City Council in Edinburgh the following year. And interestingly enough, the following year we got even a higher majority of people voting for it. So on the one hand, it is the principle, the ethical principle of having done that. And secondly, I think it is the collective work that came together with few Armenians and non-Armenians, academics, politicians, lawyers, even the church got involved to try and mobilize people to work toward this objective. And this objective has been achieved. And interestingly enough, it's not just a factual reality, it has become a legal reality. And for me as a lawyer, that makes a big difference. I think the recognition of the genocide has many, many consequences to it, and therefore it can be seen on different levels. Of course, there is the historical level, because you have to have history in order to have an event. And then you build on that history in one way or another. Now, all historians I know, but not everybody in this world, all historians I know, and they're credible historians, those in Scotland, those in England, those in this country, within Europe and the Middle East and abroad, have all confirmed the veracity of the events that took place during that period under cover of World War I as a genocide. So the history, in my opinion, is there, and I do not really waste my time arguing with people whether it happened or not. That to me is an insignificant and irrelevant discussion. What matters to me, what do we do with history? And how do we react to history? How do we interpret that history? One way of doing it is legal, another way of doing it is political, but they're not miles apart, because the two somehow come together quite well, in the sense that for any recognition to happen, you have to have a political act, a political decision. A parliament has to vote on it. An executive government has to endorse it. But the legal side of it is also interesting, because you can then go and start thinking of whether the Armenian genocide, like the Jewish Holocaust, like the Rwandan genocide, like all the other genocides that have happened subsequently, whether they comply with the 5 tests that are in the 1948 United Nations Convention on Genocide. And in my opinion, if you look at that convention, at least 3 of those 5 prerequisites are very clearly there for the Armenian instance. And therefore, if you only need 1, 3 is a bonus, is a blessing. So legally, I think it's not a question of retroactivity. It's not a question of whether Lemkin did it for the Armenians or he didn't do it for the Armenians. For me, a legal instrument is a legal instrument is a legal instrument. And therefore, in that sense, I think legally it complies with it. And there have been people like Jeffrey Robertson, who's a Queen's Counselor in this country, and other lawyers who've spoken about it. But then the politicians have to take on the responsibility of pushing that agenda forward. Then the waters maybe get a bit more muddied, because law is a more exact science than politics.
Do you see in the future recognition of the genocide by Turkey or by more countries in the world?
As an Armenian, as somebody, Joel, who grew up listening to the stories of the Armenian genocide, as somebody whose grandparents actually have a history because they and their family fled Ottoman Turkey at the time, I used to sit on my grandfather's lap, and he used to recount to me, in the way only old people can do with a very large dose of nostalgia, as to the suffering that he and his family endured, and also my grandmother and her family, as they were chased out of Turkey, where they saw some of their relatives die, some of them in front of their own eyes, others they lost track of them. So in a sense, in every single Armenian, no matter how liberal, no matter how conservative, no matter what political organization or party he or she belongs to, I think there is in the DNA of every Armenian a yearning, a hankering for a recognition of the genocide, only in as much, at least in my case, as it becomes a validation of the suffering and the experiences of those Armenian forebears and ancestors of ours who had to literally, physically go through those very bad days. So in a sense, it is in the DNA. It's a cultural, genetic reality that Armenians cannot necessarily ignore. But over and above that comes the question, is it really important to have that recognition? Because there are many massacres, there are many crimes against humanity, there are even genocides perpetrated where the world does not recognize them, whereas there are others that politically it is expedient to recognize. So again, we're playing politics. So is it important? For me, much as it is important to see the EU countries, much as it is important for me to see Latin America, the Middle East, North America, and the US government, for instance, recognize it, because it's a validation of an identity, but it's also a validation of a suffering process, a loss that has to be compensated somehow, and you can't bring your relatives who've been killed back, so at least you pay a tribute to them by actually recognizing that their names and their realities, their existence did not disappear into thin air. But for me, that is a secondary issue. Where the real hub of the matter lies is in Turkey. It is Turkey, modern-day Turkey, the successor of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, the Ataturkist Turkish regime of the moment with Erdogan as president, that should accept the genocide, not necessarily for romantic reasons or, as some people might say, for vengeful or vindictive reasons, but because it is as much good for the well-being and ethos of Turks as it is in Armenians to turn this page of history and move forward. Because funnily enough, for an Armenian people and a Turkish people who've lived together for many, many, many years and who have many similarities, look at cooking. Armenian and Turkish cooking are not miles apart. Look at personalities and characters. There are some similarities between ordinary Turks and ordinary Armenians. For the momentum to start moving forward, to start normalizing relations, you have to end this taboo. And this taboo, in my opinion, is a denial. Every time you say genocide, the shutters come down. The shutters should not come down. We are all human. We do mistakes. If we own up to those mistakes, that is what makes us exceptional rather than usual.
So, 100 years. Yes, of course. 100 years is a long time. What does the centenary mean to you personally?
The centenary for me is just a symbolism. It's a nice three numbers, 100. So in that sense, it makes me reflect that after 100 years, a full century, that Armenians have not yet been able to get that validation worldwide, but more importantly, as I said, from Turkey itself. So that symbolism is very much there. And people in the world work around symbols. Symbols matter. Symbols motivate people. So it is fully acceptable and understandable that there is going to be a whole pan-Armenian movement across the whole world trying to remind non-Armenians, friends and non-friends alike, that something like this happened, which weighs heavily on the psychology and on the very existence, on the very soul of the Armenian nation as a collective body of men, women, and children. In that sense, it is very important. But it is not more important than 99. It's not more important than 101. And at the end of the day, what matters to me is not so much the past, because I can't do much about that. What matters to me is the future, because there I can do something. Of course, because you cannot really divest politics of a certain element of ethics and morality. That is at least part and parcel of what politics is all about. Unfortunately, as you and I know, that hardly is the case these days. But there is a very strong ethical and moral argument to be made that when you commit a crime, no matter how you describe that crime and how you frame it, that it has to be dealt with. And one way for it to be dealt with, one way for it to be expiated, is for it to be recognized. Interestingly enough, you bring, Joel, the moral and ethical dimension. What some of our listeners and viewers might not know is that the Armenian church, its monasteries, its churches were decimated during this period of the genocide. For me, that is also very, very important, because within that church structure lies also not question of faith and belief, but also of ethics, probity, and morality. Those are issues that are very, very important for me, not only as an Armenian, but as somebody living in this world who has heard, as I said, on my grandfather's lap, all those stories, and I wonder, what is it that makes me less of a human being than a Rwandan whose genocide has been accepted? I want the Rwandan genocide. I want the Cambodian killing fields. I want what happened in the Balkans to be very clearly amplified and highlighted, but so would I for my own history. It's not a question of numbers, it's a question of values. Well, I think that Turkish opinion like that is not very helpful at all, because it distorts the facts. It takes them and makes an absolute mash of them. So I do not, again, as I said initially, I do not give much credence to people who like to be denialists for whatever reasons, whether because they have been asked to be denialists, whether they really do not see and understand the facts as they are. But that to me doesn't matter. There are always going to be people who say that the Armenian genocide did not happen, Armenians were not innocent, just as there are a lot of people still today in the 21st century who would tell you the Hashoah, the Jewish Holocaust, did not happen and that it was all a Zionist conspiracy. In my opinion, that is redundant, that is irrelevant, that does not speak to the facts. Were there Armenians who perhaps fought with the Russians and who were not fully committed to the Turkish values? There perhaps were. They were human. There were realities on the ground. Armenians were businessmen. They had their own considerations. But I'm not going to start looking for the exception in order to make the rule. I look for the rule and then I examine the exceptions. On some level, I understand that the borders between Armenia and Turkey are not open because at the end of the day, if we boil down this whole discussion to one of politics, then we realize that in that region there are key players. Armenia is a small country which is unfortunately not very much of a key player, but there are key players like Iran, like Turkey, like Azerbaijan, and there are pacts and political agreements between some of those countries. So on one level, I can understand that political expediency would lend Turkey to keep those borders closed, even if it did not want to do so. However, on another level, I do not understand that too well because I think that the genocide is one issue and Armenia-Turkey relations, as far as state relations go, is another thing. And at the moment, to have that border closed is ridiculous. In my opinion, if Turkey, on the 100th anniversary of the commemoration of the Armenian genocide, were to show good faith or goodwill, which incidentally, it all boils down to that as much as to other factors. I know that from my work with the Middle East North Africa region, and I can share those same ideas with you on this particular matter. If it's a question of goodwill and good faith, why not show that good faith by opening the border in 2015 rather than getting into a panic as to what the Armenian communities worldwide are going to do and what rabbit are they going to pull out of which hat in which country. That is for me what matters most. I was watching a YouTube documentary, a very short interview with somebody who said one thing that Turkey could do in 2015 is slightly adjust those borders in order to include yet another symbol, but a very potent one, Mount Ararat, within the Armenian borders rather than within Turkey. So every Armenian who looks at it almost looks at it with nostalgia and with a sense of loss. I think that is far, far more difficult to achieve in today's world than it is to open a border between Armenia and Turkey, since already there are relations unofficially. Why not make them official? Why not show good faith? And not why prove to the world that we are making a step forward rather than have this very rigid attitude that the minute you use the G word, the whole world comes to a standstill. The world does not come to a standstill. The world would actually be liberated once we get used to the idea that there was a genocide, let's admit it, let's deal with it, and let's move on.